Okay, so we're going to go get started. So this is a session, I didn't come up with the fancy name for this. This was a Mark Cashman special, if you know Mark. He's in marketing org, and he thought this was kind of an interesting way to spin the title of this. But the purpose of this session is really about trying to do more with the data that's in Yammer, be able to view it in interesting ways and get interesting insights out of it. So just from a session objective standpoint, we're going to basically look at a few things. This is kind of an extension of a session yesterday, and actually the continuation of a long story from a year ago. And so one of the things we're going to do is look at things like data exports that Yammer provides us. That's kind of a native thing that they provide us. We're going to look at also some other interesting ways that both administrators and end users can get data out of Yammer and be able to get some cool insights out of it. And I'm going to try to hopefully show you guys some new technologies, right? I think this like last year, this discussion around Yammer analytics was, I would say, pretty immature in terms of where people have gone with it. And I think a lot of that's changed over the last year. And so my hope is I want you to leave thinking, oh, hey, that I'd never thought of that, or that's something that might be interesting in our organization. So we'll look at some new interesting techniques for that. So from an agenda standpoint, the way we're going to lay this out is I want to talk a little bit about the history of Yammer analytics. Like I said, a lot's gone on in the last year. And so I want to kind of talk about where we are, and specifically from administrator insights, because that's been where a lot of the focus has been over the course of the last year. I'm going to be pretty frank. I know that Steve went through kind of his 5 or 6 different options. I kind of break it down to 3, and I'll kind of talk about them now. And when it comes to administrator analytics, I think you kind of have to accept what you can get free or out of the box. So doing the exports, maybe using Tossalog and different tools like that might be free. You could certainly go build things. I've built things in the past, and I'll kind of talk about my thoughts on the future for that. And then there's obviously the buy component of that. And so there's some fantastic ISVs out there. I've asked one specifically to participate today, primarily because of it aligns with kind of the focus that I've had in really showing insights in Power BI. Then I want to kind of switch gears. This is something that I haven't done in these sessions other than internally within Microsoft. I want to talk a little bit about empowering just normal users. I probably get, I'm going to say 4 emails a week about some sort of like analytical challenge that someone wants to get something out of Yammer. And I find probably 3 out of the 4 times it's just like a group owner or just a user that wants to measure some sort of insight out of their group. And so a lot of the efforts that I've been doing as of late have been really focused on trying to empower any user. That really aligns with Microsoft's strategy with BI, is that we want to try to put the tools for a user to come up with their own answers to questions quite easily. And that's really what I want to try to highlight as well today. So we're going to do that in 3 ways. There's a few tools that I'm going to be deploying here in May. We just did I know a lot of you guys are probably big users of Yammer, and you probably have heard things like being able to sign in with Office 365 credentials. But for the geeks, there was also something I think just as groundbreaking this week, which is behind the scenes I can build applications that connect to all of those services without having to reprompt the user. So I can write an application that might connect into something like OneDrive for Business and see the files that a user has, and then also go and integrate with Yammer without ever having to reprompt them. That's actually really huge, and they're talking about it across the hall, and I'm a little bit jealous that I'm not in there because it's a pretty cool thing. And then I'm going to show you guys some pretty cool stuff with another technology that's called Logic Apps, and hopefully that'll be kind of an interesting thing. It's kind of a codeless way of doing a workflow, maybe a trigger-based workflow. When someone generates a new message in one of your groups, maybe we want to go do something with that, like process it into a data model. And so we'll look at how we can do that from a codeless aspect. So talking a little bit about the history of kind of where we've been, I'll kind of first tell you how I got mixed into all this. I'm just a developer. I like to just build things. And I like to build things that have social components to them. I find that almost any application I build is better by having some sort of social integration with it. Even if it's as simple as just having a picture, right? If I could just have the picture of the user out of something like Yammer, out of their user profile, I think that automatically that application starts to light up more and more. And so as I was building more and more things with social, Yammer really became my first-class citizen for doing that. And I reached out to Christoph and Mark and a few other people about doing some sessions at SPC last year. And really what they said is, can you do a spin around maybe, I know you've built some cool visualizations, but can you take it further and maybe do actual like business intelligence on top of it? And so that started an interesting journey. My first step was, well, let's see what's there. What does Yammer give me? You know, and I found that there was some high-level dashboards. I found that there was a administrator export that, although it did give me things in an easy format to work with, so I get these CSV files, they're really easy to be able to do things with. I found that there was a lot of things that were lacking, lots of things that I wanted, like the number of likes, the number of shares, maybe all those additional aspects that I wanted to know about the data. And so the developer in me said, well, you know what? There's APIs. I'll just go and augment it. I'll go and call APIs, and I'll go and pull together a data set that I think is good to go and do some interesting things off of. And I think there was some really good iterations of that. And we demonstrated this at the SharePoint conference last year. We did it in all the different Power BI tools that are out there. And it ended up being one of the overall top-rated at the SharePoint conference. And it's certainly not because of my presentation skills, because I speak Texan and most of you guys probably can't understand me. But I think it's really because of the topic. It's a really exciting topic, and I think it speaks to the momentum that we're having with Yammer on why that's so interesting. So at some point, I decided that trying to teach someone to fish, when it got into APIs and making throttled calls into Yammer, was getting too complex. And so about a month after the SharePoint conference, based on the popularity, I went and I built a little tool that said, I'll let a network admin go and log in, provide some parameters of how far they want to go back, what sort of things do they want in that data set, and a day later, and there's a reason it takes a while, but a day later we'll spit out a new set of CSV files that have all the great goodness that you might want to do. And it was fully automated, ran in the cloud, and it did some really interesting things. However, so just a little bit about that, I guess. First of all, it has been really popular. I've had about, 266 unique orgs have run data through it, 720 exports that account for 6.1 million messages, 2.7 million threads, and 3.8 million users. It's also by far my most popular blog post. So this is like a look at all my blog posts over the last year. You can guess which one is like off the charts there. It's Yammer, right? Because, there's a lot of interest in this area. So all that sounds great. What's the downside? Well, some of you guys have probably used this tool and you know what the downside is. First of all, it's not my daytime job. And unfortunately, Yammer is what we consider an evergreen service. That means that there's always things changing. They're doing A/B testing, introducing new capabilities, changing the API so that it's more aligned with Microsoft's one API strategy. And so something would change, and I'd be in the middle of like a death march project trying to get something else out, and I could never really go back to really address that. And so what I found is it was just really hard to keep up with. I'd have another thing that I found is that there was confusion. I'd have users read the blog post and immediately try to go do an export. They weren't a network admin, or they weren't. They didn't have a verified account or an enterprise account to even be able to get an export. And so I'll take fault in that and probably not providing the best messages when something came back wrong. But there was confusion in that. And so another one is it was cloud hosted. We have a lot of partners and customers that, although Yammer is a cloud service, they don't like the idea of sending all their messages through a third party. I actually stripped out the message from the very beginning But still, you just have to take my word for it, in that I'm doing that. And so, that was something that was, I think, a challenge with it. So I've kind of come to the conclusion of, I'm going to get out of the business of doing network administration type of reporting. I will keep what I have out on my blog in terms of an open source effort. If you want to pull that down and see how I call APIs, how I crack open an export and be able to repackage it at the end, I think all of that's useful things. But I'm going to break it down to 3 things. I think that you need to accept what we have that's out there, and obviously through user voice and different channels, we can try to get more things integrated and more capabilities being a native part of Yammer. You could certainly build it. I built it. I've seen other people build it. I don't think it's necessarily rocket science, but I had trouble supporting it. And I think that could be, you could run in that same boat too unless you have dedicated resources for it. So the third one is buy it, and we've had some really great ISVs that have emerged over the last year and their ability to execute on that. So what I'm going to do is highlight those 3 areas. We're going to talk about accept it, build it, and buy it. So let's jump into the first one. Hey, look at those handsome fellas. So one of the other things that happened right around the same time that I was developing an automated export that did all this augmentation is I had a couple guys from within Microsoft reach out to me, Paul and Steve, and they said, hey, we are really interested in this, and we'd like to learn kind of the process of building a model. And I think it speaks to the Power BI tool set. That's kind of one of the reasons I really have stuck with the Power BI tool set is that these guys put together some really great things very quickly. I think they had their first rev within just a couple of days that had a number of insights that I hadn't even thought about. And that's probably the cool thing is those guys have the mindset of what types of things that a network administrator or someone that's really curating a community would need to see. I have to guess. That's not me. You definitely don't want me running your communities. I will tell you that. So this has been a grassroots effort. There's lots of information. You can go out and see this. I call it as easy as 1, 2, 3. You go do an export. You basically stick it in a location, and then you just refresh the data source and pull it in there. So it does a great job of what is there in the export. There's no augmentation here whatsoever. So let's go from there and talk about some of the build scenarios. So you could take the exports and maybe do some different ways of augmenting that. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that if you're going to do anything with Power BI, I say you need to double down on your bits. And what I mean by that is you need to go to a 64-bit version of Office. And the default version that most people install is 32-bit, and ultimately what that does is it's going to limit your ability to work with more and more data. If you have a small network that you're working with, probably not going to be an issue, but once you get into larger networks, you definitely are going to want that extra space. Just about every PC you buy these days is 64-bit, so it's not a matter of 64-bit Office not being able to run on your computer. I run it on just a little Surface Pro 3 here, and I've done our entire Office 365 technical network from the beginning of time. And it does it just fine. Another thing that you should consider, and I'm going to show you an example of this, is when I worked with Steve and those guys on kind of the first iteration of a out-of-the-box export, we really just did formats of dates to be able to do different slices. If I wanted to slice by month or by year or by day. And since that time, I've found a lot of people coming to me and wanting to get even more granular. And really the driver out of this is the popularity of things like a Yam Jam. They want to see like the 5-minute window, what sort of activity happened in there. And so I don't think it's a case of I want to go and do an export and I want to put all our data from the beginning of time and slice it in little 5-minute chunks because you're going to end up with just a gigantic date dimension. But what I do think is there's some really interesting insights that you might be able to do by creating what I would call a formalized date dimension. And if me saying dimension is I'm losing you already, when we talk about doing this modeling of this data, we talk about what we consider facts and dimensions. A dimension is some sort of attribute that I want to look at data by. So it could be a user, it could be a group, and a fact is just a measure that I want to look at it by. So the number of likes could be a fact, and the user could be that dimension that I'm looking at it by. So a date is a dimension. I want to look at data by the year or the month or to the minute. And so that's what we'd use there. Another thing, I didn't really spend a lot of time in this last year when we did a session, but if you're going to work with the exports, I would actually highly encourage you looking at Power Query. Power Query, it gives me the ability to go and pull in the data, but allows me to do a lot of manipulation of the data before it goes and gets thrown into my model. I could do filtering. So a good example is when you get messages out of the export, you get all private and public messages. So if I do a private message between two individuals, that's in that export. You get everything as a network administrator. I might want to, from the very start, filter out anything that's private. And it gives me a really easy way to do that. Another one, I'll show you a sample that I do later where I want to do word matching when it comes to like brands. And I'll actually show you this in Power Query is I don't want to, when I do matching on words, I don't want to get case sensitivity to cloud up my results. And so I can do simple things like, hey, just make everything uppercase or make everything lowercase so that I can easily do quick matches on things. Those are just a few of the examples. There's actually a number of things that you can do in Power Query. You can convert data types and columns. And the cool thing is it actually stores the order at which you do things so that it can rerun it when you put new data through it. So Power Query is a tool I definitely recommend. And the last one is if you're going to do any of this modeling, you really should learn the language to create different types of measures. And it's called DAX. And it stands for Dimensional Expression Language or Data Analysis Expression, DAX. Is that right? Yeah. And similar to doing formulas in Excel, so I find that people that can do formulas in Excel tend to be able to pick this up pretty quickly. It's a little bit different, but in a lot of cases, you should be able to pick that up pretty quickly. So those are really the tools, I think, to help you take those exports and go further with them. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to jump over, and I'm going to show you just a quick example of maybe going a little bit further and some of the interesting insights that you might be able to get with some of your data. And so what I'm going to actually show you guys is a little bit, I'm going to be sensitive in what I show you, but I'm going to show you a little bit of some of the Office 365 network when it comes to something like a Yam Jam that was going on during it. So this is a Yam Jam. It looks like this one. I'd have to look at my date. It looks like this was on September the 29th of last year. And this is doing a couple of things. There's a lot of work that's been done in this model. I did a lot of work with that team and coming up with a lot of interesting insights. So they do like joins, network joins and leaves to date. So they're actually doing an accumulated total of things. But we really have a lot of measures that we're actually going out and analyzing by this. So I know this looks a little bit messy because we have a lot of measures there, but what you see down here at the bottom, this is to a very accurate time span. This is to like the 5 minute of detail. So we could get we could really drill down on specific things. We could even look for like a specific question and when it was originated and maybe see how much activity that sparked out of that. So that I think that's one really interesting way to be able to take this data and look at maybe a date dimension on how it might be able to go further. While we're in here, this is really the only time that I'm going to go into this version of Power BI. I'll show you a couple more just visuals to show you kind of some of the interesting types of things that Power BI can provide. This is actually what we call Power View. And it's a connected dashboarding type of technology in here. So this is a pretty cool one. This is looking at a number of different dimensions at once and actually looking how it changes over time. So again, looking at that time dimension at different ways that we might be able to light things up. So this is, I work in the Office 365 developer space. So these are a number of the Office 365 developer groups within the Office 365 network. And so what I can do is I can look at these by the group joins and the number of posts, and then the size of this is based upon an engagement value that we came up with. And engagement includes a number of things. It's an accumulation of the number of posts, likes, shares, and I even think attachments might fit into there. I forget how we came up with the specific value. But the cool thing is I can really see growth of things. So if I look at this first big group that's popping up here, this is a group called the Patterns and Practice, Office 365 Developer Patterns and Practices. This is a group that has gone viral within, not just within Microsoft, but within the world. It was something we started out on GitHub, and we could see it just catapulting over all these groups, and we can actually, maybe from there, be able to go and look at the types of things that they're doing. They do monthly calls, and they do a bunch of different things from a marketing standpoint that might help impact that. So again, I think just applying that time dimension here can do some really interesting things. So that's a little on Power BI and exports. Again, I think the exports there's been a lot of thought leadership around that over the last year, and so I'm not going to spend too much more time specific to those. There is another thing that I wanted to get into, though, and that is when we talk about social data, we're talking about big data. And I know that's a word that's thrown out a lot, is big data. But I think social, more than anything, really fits into that, because we're collecting so many messages throughout the course of even a day. But every one of those messages starts to have connections within these social graphs, right? Because when I'm responding to someone, there's a connection there because it's two users that are interacting in a thread. If I'm posting a picture, now there's an actual digital asset that's associated with maybe those two individuals. So you're starting to build these really elaborate webs of collaboration that could be very, very interesting to be able to drill into. And that's why I think there's so much interest these days in things like Delve and the Office Graph, because they've put machine learning and some insights on top of that. They're mining a lot of the activities that are going on right now in Office 365, but you can do the same sort of things with the exports, or any sort of data that you might be able to get out of Office 365. So a few of the samples here are things like sentiment analysis. That's something that's done at a pretty broad scale. I tried to do sentiment analysis in my export tool last year, and I was actually having to go and call a service for every single message I wanted to get sentiment for. And so there are other solutions in the big data space that might be able to do that at a much quicker pace. Other things are there's a scenario I'm going to use is brand awareness. Think about all the messages that you might have. So I mentioned in my exporter, I've processed I don't remember, 7 million messages. Think about how many words are in each one of those messages. If I wanted to separate every word and then do aggregation by words to see, hey, Microsoft, we just launched a new product like Sway. How much activity is the word sway getting? Now, you'd hope they might do things like make it a topic or use a hashtag, but that's not always the case. If I truly want to see how my brand is getting out there, I might want to take a step further and be able to do more with that. And so that's what I'm going to do with some of our new technology that we have in Azure today. And I promise I won't geek out too much with it. But we're going to look at a little thing called Hadoop. Anyone heard of Hadoop? Awesome. So ultimately, Hadoop is basically it's a set of algorithms and software to do distributed storage and distributed processing of mass amounts of data. So its sweet spot, it's not in producing an output in seconds. If you're the type of person that likes to run a query and get a result back in seconds, this is not for you. This is something that I send tons and tons of data into. I go and process it across a number of different compute nodes, and then I get a result back later. But it does it way faster than if I tried to do that more singularly. It processes things in something called MapReduce jobs. So what it's going to do, it's going to ultimately get an algorithm for how it's going to separate the data out to a number of different machines. It's going to run on those machines, and then it's going to bring it together and reduce it by coming up with how the consolidated results should come back. So that's as geeky as I'll get there. You can go home and say, I learned about MapReduce and Hadoop and things like that. This leverages what we call an applied schema. I do think this is an important thing because a lot of times what I find is the data that I get out of, this isn't a knock on Yammer by any means, but sometimes the data I get out of the system isn't in the cleanest form. There might be, especially in things like messages, there might be some dirtiness in there that if I tried to treat that in a very strict relational form, like SQL is going to make me do, I would have all kinds of errors. In fact, I ran into that building an export wizard. I'd have little one-off things where one message would fail, and because of how strict I was doing with my relationships, the whole job would fail, and the user would have to resubmit it. And I finally did horrible things like just ignore the exception and keep going. I really did. I mean, it just was like a snowball of things. Like you catch one thing and, oh, here's something else. So the great thing about Hadoop is it can apply a schema onto it, and if something doesn't perfectly fit, it's not going to just break. It does a really good job of that. It uses it would be considered what we call a NoSQL technology. So Microsoft offers a Hadoop offering. It's called HD Insight. It runs in Azure. It's something what's cool about Hadoop is I can spin up a Hadoop cluster to go and do some processing, and then I can break it down and just delete the whole compute node, or all the compute nodes. That's actually what I did last night. Hadoop's not something that you demo in front of someone because it does take a while for the jobs to process and run. And it also is expensive to keep those nodes running. So I did a job, got my output, and I shut down my nodes. And you can automate all this. So if you wanted to do something like this on a weekly basis, you absolutely could. So the challenge that I want to do, that I set out to do was, this might be what you, on the left side of the screen, what you might have from a data standpoint inside of a export of messages. So I have a date and a message. And I know there's a lot more that's there, but for our simplicity's sake, let's just consider date and a message. What I want to do is I want to basically break it up by word and date. So you can see this is what I'm trying to get to is a date, and then for every word I might have a count for it. So what I want to do is look for some of Microsoft's new technologies or new products that we've launched that have a brand associated with them. So things like Sway, or we just renamed Spartan to Edge. So some of those types of things I thought it'd be interesting to go out on the Office 365 network and see what sort of insights we get. So let's do that. And I would guarantee you that this is probably data that not even the GPMs that are in charge of those products have probably seen. They might be doing some of this out on some of the consumer social networks like Twitter, but my guess is they've never done this within the place where all of our Office community gathers. So let's take a look. So if I go out to, and I'm going to close this. So if I go out to my C exports folder, if you've ever done any of our export tools, you will probably know that's kind of been the standard area we've used for things. It just happens to be what I started using, and I think Steve started doing it as well. But I basically put this raw folder out here where I had my messages, and I'll just zoom in on this. So I basically just took the messages CSV file out of the export. I didn't really care about the other ones. All I really cared about was the messages in this point. Actually, the messages CSV actually has a lot of information. It has the sender. Well, a lot of things are actually already in that. It's kind of denormalized for that sake. And what I did is I put this out in what we call the Hadoop storage, which is just blob storage out in Azure. I picked it up, applied a schema onto it, and then they have a little split function that can split something based on some character. So I split everything by spaces. So you will see some weird results in this. I don't try to pull out punctuation. So I might see sway, and then I'll see a separate entry for sway with a period at the end. The cool thing is I can select all those when I bring them into Power BI. So you'll see how easy it is for me to do some of that. So I basically got a word count out. And so let's take a look. We'll actually try to work with this here. You notice that it got bigger when I did this, and that would make sense because I went from maybe 2 million rows to like 100 million rows. I mean, you think about how many words are in a message. That's the type of math we're looking at here. So it's a really big data set. So what I'll do is let me go ahead and open up Excel. And all of a sudden my computer has gotten slow, so I'm glad I'm almost done with the big data stuff. So if this errors, I do have one that's done. I'm going to use Power Query. I told you that I would encourage you guys to look more into Power Query. We didn't spend a lot of time on it in the last year's session. But what I'm going to do is go and get some data from a file. And I accidentally clicked the wrong thing. But we'll go out here and say we want a CSV file. And I'm going to go find my word count, which is under C, Exports. And I will zoom in. I know I have this tiny resolution here, but I promise you I'll zoom in. So this is going and evaluating the query. So it's going to go and read the data out of there. And what you'll see is this just goes on forever. It's basically this endless list of just word and date, word and date, word and date. And so there it is. A few things that I want to do. I mentioned that if sway is capitalized versus lowercase, I don't care about that. It's still sway. So I'm going to apply just a really quick transformation on this. So if I go to the Transform tab, what I'm going to do out here is basically just do a quick format and say, hey, just put everything in uppercase. Or I could camel case it. I can do all kinds of things. But what I'm going to do is just do capitalize everything. I'll just do everything in uppercase. As soon as I do that, what you'll see is it'll come through and do that. So I have that now. And you can see that I have these steps over here to the side. So it's actually keeping track of those steps one by one. So if I went and came in with a new set of words, it could apply those steps. I wouldn't have to rebuild this over and over. It does that cleansing for me. It remembers those steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm ready to actually bring this into my workbook. So I'm going to go here and say load into. And this is going to allow me to select how I load this data. I can load it into the worksheet. And if I did that, I promise you Excel would just fall down dead. This is 100 million rows. Excel is not meant to work with that type of data. Power Pivot is, which is where we're actually going to send it into. So what I'm going to do is say I just want to create a connection, but I'm going to say that I want to add it to our data model. So I'll just go and say load now, and I still might not have a happy ending with this because it seems like Excel's running a little bit slow. But what you'll see if you look down at the bottom, we should be able to see our progress. It's retrieving data at this point in time. And we'll see this grow. I think it's about 100 million rows in all. So it's going to process this. We're already at about 1 million. Maybe 100 million is an exaggeration. I don't remember. But once I have this in here, I can go and do a few things. One is I probably want to create something that's a little bit easy. This is going to have the exact date and time. So it'll be like to the second. And if I try, that's harder to aggregate at the second level. So what I might want to do is aggregate everything just to the day. I just care about day by day what had the most activity for different words. So it looks like it's still going. It's at 400, or what is that, 4 million? Is that 4 million? Actually, you know what? We don't need to sit and watch data load. I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to go to one that I finished loading the data in. So like any good chef, pull it out of the oven done. Maybe. There we go. And so I already have my data model here. There's not much to this data model. All I did was basically create something that doesn't have time sensitivity to it. I basically truncated time off of a date column. So what I'm going to do is let's just maybe create a power view off this and see what sort of things that I could see with just words. I have a t-shirt, by the way, a SharePoint t-shirt. I have SharePoint t-shirts up here. But I have a SharePoint t-shirt that says working on it. I don't know if you've ever done anything in SharePoint. And it has the working on it thing. That's kind of what I should be wearing right now, I feel like. It's like suspension. What are we going to see? I'll make this quick once it gets up here. So ultimately what I'm going to end up with is this huge list of words. The cool thing is that Power View is going to let me quickly just search for it'll do a partial search on a word. So I can search for sway, and it'll find all these partial matches. And I'll actually maybe pull in 50 words that have sway in it, because there might be some tags. There might be, I noticed that there was one, like need sway, I think was a pretty popular hashtag that I found when I was looking at this data. So let's take a look here. I'll go ahead and let's throw out maybe we'll put word in a filter first. That's going to be an important thing. If we don't put it in a filter, it's going to try to work with all that data at once. So I'm going to bring that over as a filter. And you can see there's some weird things around punctuation. This is something people have written message with this in it. But what we'll do is we'll look for sway. So this will go and just do a quick query for us. We'll find a bunch of different ones. And I probably could have done a better job with my MapReduce job to clean up some of the mess in here. I probably could have also used Power Query to clean up some of the mess. But you can see here's some links. Like those are probably valid things. Like if I want to see popularity of sway, let's include those. If someone's posting a link to a sway, that's probably something that's interesting. So I'll grab a bunch of these. I could just click these all day long. Let me find with some of the big ones. There's the one that has there's a 133. So you can see there's counts over here to the side. There's one that has about 600. Let me find that one, and then I'll move on. Yeah, there it went. All right. So now I have some words selected. Let's now look at this maybe as a count over time. So I'm going to go grab count, and I'm going to grab month, and just create a quick chart. Now, by default, it's going to be in a tabular form. But what I'll do is, if anything that's date-based is going to look a lot better in a line chart. And it is thinking again. What did I do? Oh, wrong one. There we go. So now I can see sway's activity over time. And we could probably go and see, like this was probably the launch. That's about the time we launched it that time of year. So there was a lot of activity, and then it kind of trickled off. And then it looks like something happened around, the beginning of the year. So it looks like there was a dip around the holiday season, and then it kind of peaked back up in April. And then it started to trickle back down in May. So to me, this is a pretty cool thing that we might be able to go and look and analyze some of our brand type of things just by doing a MapReduce job with something like Hadoop. So what I'll do is, I know that the concept of MapReduce and things like that can be a little bit deep from a technology standpoint, but my plan is to post kind of the step-by-step on how you might do something like this. It's really just about putting some data in, getting some data out. It's not about any sort of modeling. It's pretty easy once you get the data in and out. Awesome. So at this point, I've kind of walked you through accept, and I've walked you through how we might build some things, right? Whether that be with the pure data exports and using Power BI, or even taking it further with some other tools like Hadoop. What I wanted to do next is talk about the buy approach. And did I just say buy? So we've done build and we've done accept. So let's talk a little bit about buy. The ISV community has done a really good job of embracing this. So Steve went into this in his session a little bit about some of the players that are in this space that are providing really cool products, right? And I think that's the key here is this is a product that's supported. It's not something that someone put on their blog and does on some spare time. This is something that is supported, where you're going to get feedback and get help if something were to go wrong along the way. So each one of these guys, I think, has really unique things to offer. I think they all have some really cool capabilities. I'm not going to pretend to play favorites or anything like that, but I did invite one to come and kind of give their perspective of going and building some insights on top of Yammer. And that's tyGraph, so they're here today. And I asked them to maybe just speak for just a little bit about their solution. And the main reason I asked tyGraph is because, again, from the very start, I've been about getting the data into Power BI. I want to keep it on the Microsoft toolset, and that's something that tyGraph has embraced. And so I thought it was a good synergy for my talk today, given I'm trying to get out of the network admin business, and these guys are getting into it with the same toolset. So with that, I'm going to invite tyGraph to come and chat.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. My name is Dean Swan. I am the product manager for tyGraph. And I just want to say, I'm looking out. There's some really hardy folks. So either you couldn't get out of here until today, or you're just really proud to see a bunch of data geeks here. But sprinkled among you are some community managers. If you're a community manager of a Yammer network, okay, good. I've got some things to say to you. So let me see if I can advance the slides here. First of all, I'd like to say, again, thank you to Richard. It's an honor to share the stage with him. One of the things I know about Richard is he does builds demos for some pretty important people at Microsoft, so I think I'm in good hands today. So I want to start out by giving you some context. In January of 2014, on the Yammer customer network, a community manager extraordinaire by the name of Melanie Hohertz threw down the gauntlet and said, I need better metrics. And I need metrics like file views and file downloads and notes views. And this is a lady who's been known to throw down a gauntlet or two over time. And I went to my team and I said, you know what, look at this list of things and look at all the people that are asking for this. Is this something that we could do? The team said yes, and that was the foundation for what we built in tyGraph. Lots more in there, but that started it all. What she said to me was, Dean, I need the metrics to drive change. And if you saw her session yesterday, at the heart of what she's talking about is we are awash in change. So you have to accept that fact and look for actionable metrics. That's the key phrase, to help me change, to drive change, and to drive adoption. So we built tyGraph to answer this so what question. And what we mean by that is we don't just put a metric on the page because it makes the CEO look good. We put a metric on the page, we step back and we say, so what? So what? What does this help me do? So at the very beginning, tyGraph was about actionable metrics, and those were table stakes. The second thing that was really important to our community was that they didn't want to hand their data off to yet another third party. Now, I fully believe in cloud first, mobile first. I'm in. However, we live in a hybrid world. And as an ISV, I have to pay attention to the fact that, give me an amen if you still run 2010, 2007, right? All right, brother, right on. That's the world that we're living in. So we pay attention to that. And so point number 2 here is we give you the opportunity to run on-premise, if you want to, behind your firewall, in your own private cloud. We've had a lot of success with Azure. We really like it. Or you can use our hosted service. Point number 3. Now let me back up to 2 real quick. We put that data in a proper data warehouse. So if you've built a data warehouse in your day, you know the importance of that with proper BI principles and best practices. Point number 3, it's ready for use out of the box with 7 comprehensive dashboards. And you're able to create your own custom dashboards. The good news for you guys is when we started tyGraph, it was 12. And we live by the principle that, as co-founder of Unlimited Viz and our president, Ed Sinez, says, Professor, here's a paper. I'm sorry, it's 12 pages. If I'd had more time, it would be 3. And so we want to pack into that real estate what matters to community managers, your business stakeholders, and group admins. So let me jump to point number 4, and that's about lurker metrics. We also call it content consumption. But one of the things Melanie said to us was, look, I know you can't know if somebody read a post. You have no biometric sensors understanding if somebody read a post. But can you tell me anything about file views, file downloads, notes views? I'm a Southerner too, like Richard, so if you don't understand me, come up later and I'll explain what I said. But that, if I understand how people are consuming content, then I have a shot at understanding the adoption in my network. And that's very, very important to people. And then 5, the 5th thing I wanted to let you know about tyGraph today is we have a measure of active engagement. And it's transparent. We tell you what makes that up and allow you to understand it. And in future versions, we're going to allow you to weight each of those criteria and measure active engagement in a way that hasn't been possible before. So those are 5 things that I wanted to mention. I've got a couple of more. I'm going to show you some of our dashboards here. Let me see if I can move the, there we go. So this is what tyGraph looks like. This is one of the 7. This is about group activity and group activity indicators. The first thing you might notice, Richard spent a lot of time, some time talking about time and dates. And that's really important because out of the box with Yammer, you get 7 days, 28 days, 7 days, 28 days. That's it. I can relate those 2 periods of time to my personal life. But at work, I really need a little more. tyGraph allows you to dive in at days, months, quarters, years, whatever you need. One thing I'd also like to point out here is, Richard, how do you make the laser work? The red button? Mm-hmm. Is that it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me see here if I can make this work. There we go. There's a couple here. One is the responded but not at mentioned percentage. Steve mentioned this yesterday, and we in fact do call it the serendipity score. But what happens when you're, and I'm sure this has happened to you, you're on the way to the cafeteria at work, the VP of something stops you in the hall and says, you know, Amy, I heard we're rolling out email. Isn't email and Yammer, I heard we're rolling out Yammer. Aren't they the same thing, email, Yammer? And right before you throat punch them, you have to stop and say, no. And you take a deep breath, and you say, no. With email, perfectly good tool. I think we've gotten some good use out of email for the past 30 years. It's a good tool. But with Yammer, you don't have to know who you're addressing in order to get a message out there. So that percentage simply says, and this is our network, let's see what it says, 20, so almost 30% of the time, somebody who responded to a message wasn't originally addressed. Simple as that. Shows me some impact, shows me what's going on in my network. I'm going to move quickly to the next dashboard here. And this is our, we call it content consumption. We have a very large client. You may have heard of them. They make the UI here. You know, lurker metrics just does not play everywhere. So we've renamed this content consumption. I think it's a better name. Thank you, Chris Flint, in the back there. By the way, Chris is on stage at 10:45 and S104. He'll be talking about our product a little bit in the context of his social journey as well. The one thing I just wanted to show here is you'll notice now you can see top 10 downloaded files, top viewed files, notes views, likers, file by type, lots of stuff like that. We have a client who is sponsoring a big sporting event. They use this to show the CEO, look, you really are popular. But more than that, they got people the ability to understand things like training material that were being consumed. Right? All right. A couple more things here I wanted to mention. I wanted to leave you with a few things. And, you know, again, as Richard said, there are a few of us now in the marketplace. You know, there are some differences between us. But whatever you do, if you move from accept and then you get to the build and you go, you know what, I just figured out I'm not Richard, and you want to go to the buy, here are 3 things I want you to really focus on. Please try to answer the so what. What problem do we want our metrics to help us solve? And this is very important as you try to get going in this space. And then secondly, what choices do I have on how to manage our data? We take this very seriously, and that was one of the things we wanted to make sure of. We could do it on-premise, we could do it in the cloud. And then the third thing, what questions should I be ready to answer that haven't been asked yet? Right? That's why we have 7 dashboards and the ability to extend. Because our community managers who help build our product, Chris Lemp, Amy Dolzine, Melanie Hohertz, and many others, they are our best source of ideas, as are you in your community. And you want to be able to respond to that request in a way that makes sense. So make sure that you're able to do that. The last thing I want to do, since Richard was brave enough to bring me on stage, was just plug a couple of things. The first one is the Office 365 network. How many are out there? Okay, a goodly amount. This is a good crowd. But for anybody, you know, listening from home, if you're getting going in this area, there are a number of very talented community managers. Some of them are in this room, and analytic geeks that frequent that network. I highly, highly, highly recommend, once you get home, make a point of going out to the Office 365 network. There's a lot of serious nuggets of goodness being dropped out there. And I'd also just recommend, there are other resources too. The Yammer.com, for example, is a great place to get information with regard to community management and what's going on in analytics. Richard, I'd like to thank you for your time today.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. I can really relate to number 3 there. It's fun to put like a model together and sit down with someone that understands like the types of questions they want to ask. It's really cool when you're like, oh yeah, I can get that out of here. Check it out. You know, it's neat to be able to have that, and the data warehouse that they talked about, that's really a key part of being able to think ahead of those. So I'm going to switch gears. I mentioned that I'm kind of getting out of the network administrator business that deals with exports, just the whole network administrator needing to do exports. I think there's complexities. I'd rather you guys be kind of dealing with that on your own. That sounded weird, but I think you know what I mean. So what I want to talk about is, what about the non-administrators? This is probably my biggest request these days. I had a group from Microsoft Legal just the other week, and we're about to run what we call, what is our thing that we do at Microsoft this time of year? It's 1 week. Yeah, and so there's all this planning around 1 week and being able to track the different things that are going on with that. And so I get this request quite often is, at Microsoft, we have a huge network and we have very few network administrators. In fact, they're probably all in this room. I don't know if they're all in this room, but probably close. And so what happens when someone wants to be able to just look what's going on in their group? And so that's one of the things that I chose to really attack this last year. And some of you guys may have seen some of the things that I've been working on, but I've been waiting for a really key thing to happen that happened this last week, which is the consolidation of how we authenticate into Yammer. I can have an application now that a user can authenticate to for things like Power BI that also can now talk to Yammer without having to authenticate twice. It's a pretty key thing, and it's going to, I think, open up some really cool capabilities. So the first thing that I have is that I'm going to be releasing this month is for group users. Just any user can go to this. And it's called the Yammer Group Explorer for the web. And what this is a user can go to it. They can sign in and basically walk through a wizard and say what network and what group and what time range do you want to look at data. And then it'll actually go and stick this into the new Power BI, which I don't know if you guys have all had a chance to look at, but we have a new version that's in preview right now that's all in a browser. It's all HTML5. It works on mobile devices. It's awesome. And this automates that process. Now, you're not going to get near the detail in this that you might as like a network administrator. We could get to a lot of information, but another kind of limitation of this today is that the Power BI data sets that you can push into this that I'm able to do through code is somewhat limited. So I can't do things like calculated columns. But what you'll find is there are some pretty interesting things that I can do in these types of exports that we'll look at. And so we'll look at this here in just a moment, but it's all going to be web-based and really just flow a user through from end to end, getting the types of data that they want. Now, because of the fact that it is somewhat limited, another thing that I've done is the exact same application, but as a task pane app. So the second thing we'll look at is what I call Yammer Group Explorer, but it's the Excel add-in version. So this is basically a task pane that walks you through the same process. It basically is a wizard that walks you through and says what group or what network, what group, and what date range, and then it goes and pulls it into the worksheet. The cool thing is that worksheet already has a model behind it. So it's already going to have you don't have to model anything. It's there immediately to where you can start. In fact, I even built some dashboards on it to where you can immediately start getting some value out of it. So I'll quickly demonstrate these two for you. And we just released the update for the authentication to all work this week. So this is something that I'm hoping later this month I will do a post on and get it out to the community. So let's first take a look at the web version. So I'm going to go to, and this is actually something that the initial version of this is actually out on my blog. It's something that you could pull down and take a look at. And we do some weird multi-factor auth things here at Microsoft. So I have to have my phone out right now. And you'll see that here in just a moment. So this page is going to load, and the first thing it's going to say is you need to authenticate. And there actually will probably be 2 authentication prompts. Here's the first one. Now what's changing here this week is now that I'm authenticating once to talk to Power BI, I should be able to go and talk to any of the other things that we have, like Office 365 or talk to Yammer. So there's kind of this double auth thing that this is why I haven't released this as an actual deployed solution up until here in the next few weeks. So here I'll go ahead and it's kind of weird, but it's going to ask me to authenticate again. And that's just because Yammer up until now hasn't really fit under that umbrella of a common consent application within Microsoft. So now it's going to have me do this little dance with a phone. When does that change happen with the Yammer API? It is out there now in a preview. So it's able to be leveraged today. You have to give it to an app, yeah. So the benefit is once I deploy this, as long as you have Yammer in your organization and you have Office 365, it'll just say, hey, this app wants to be able to get to this data on your behalf. One thing I'll mention with both of these tools, 100% of the processing happens on your client. It does not happen in I don't have any process that's running out in the cloud. It's happening client side, and that's something that I really wanted to make sure happened. So here I'm logged in. I'll select my network. We'll go to the, these are the old network names, so it says IT Pro Network, but it's the Office 365 network. And let's look at Ignite, and let's maybe grab all the messages since last week for the Ignite conference. So I'm going to go back to April 27th, and I'll say next. I can give this a data set, and actually, before I actually process this, let me go to the new Power BI so you can actually see this work. So let me go to powerbi.com. I'll go ahead and sign in. Everyone can go preview this right now, so you can go preview this. If you look, I have a few data sets that are already here, but we'll create one specifically for Ignite. So I'll just come in here and I'll give this, we'll create a new one. I'll call this Ignite Demo. Say next. It's ready to go, and as soon as I say start processing, this will pop up almost immediately until it says error occurred creating data set. So you're going to have to trust me that it creates this beautiful data set that you can go do things with. I'm not sure what's going on here right now. It might be some of the things that we're switching over from an auth perspective, but the idea is that we'll immediately create you a data set over here. Here's one that I did a few months ago when I first built this. But there's a number of things that I can look at. So if I wanted to look at maybe the number of likes by client used and look at this in like a pie chart, I could go and look here and see, okay, well, it looks like web is by far the most popular thing used in this network, followed by, what is this, an iPhone. But I could even take this a little bit further and pick on people if I wanted to. So let's maybe add another chart here and look at users. And I'll move this down. And let's pick on Jeremy Thake. If I click on him, we can see that he's using some iPhone. So our good Microsoft employee apparently has some iPhones that he's using as well. So anyway, just some interesting insights. The idea is that it be automated. It gets in there immediately for you. So let's jump to the second one, which is the Excel plugin. So let's jump over to this Group Explorer. And what you're going to see is this is going to launch Excel. There's already a template here for you. Where I would see this fitting in, and I'm working with the Office team to try to make this happen, is when you go to File, New. You see all these templates here? What I want is there to be a Yammer template. I want someone to be able to just go grab the Yammer template and immediately start pulling data into it. We have things like PayPal. Why shouldn't we have Yammer in there? I feel strongly about that. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and launch the app in here. It would normally be automatic, but in this case, for this demo, it's going to load for us. It's going to be the same process. And again, as we get that consolidated authentication experience, this little pop-up window will eventually go away. This is kind of just a requirement for now. But I'll go ahead and log in with Microsoft. If I put .com. And now I'm getting a little thing on my phone. There it is. Okay, authenticating and bada bing. There we go. And so I can do the same sort of things now. I'll go and do the Office 365 network. We'll do Ignite. And hopefully we'll have more luck this time grabbing for the first, the last 2 weeks of Ignite. So I'll go ahead and say process. And what you'll see is it'll start loading this data. It's just going to crank away at it. And when it's done, it'll tell me, it'll say, hey, we've finished processing everything. Don't worry if it looks like it slows down. Yammer does this thing where I can't just like bombard it with calls. It's going to kind of throttle me. But 100% of the processing here occurred in Excel. It didn't occur on a server that I have. So you can feel safe that I'm not doing anything with your data. So now I could actually close the app and refresh my model. I can just come over to my Power Pivot tab and refresh all. So it's loading all this data into the model. And I can immediately start looking at things in different ways. So this is just the window that's pulling up as it loads that data. But I can close it and immediately go over and start looking at these views. So there's a bunch of different charts that I put together around activity by user. So if I wanted to see who's really engaged in the network, I can do all that just as an end user. Cool. So those are coming soon. There's one more thing I want to cover, and I have about, looks like 11 minutes to do so. And that's something else that I think is really cool. And there's a lot of uses for this that I think you guys will find really interesting. We're going to talk about something called Azure Logic Apps. Usually when you hear Azure, probably lose all the network admins in the room. They're like, oh gosh, you're going to talk cloud to me and building things in the cloud. But this is actually really cool. It's kind of like, it's like almost like Visio-based workflow building. I can just drag different activities down and build the workflow of what I want to occur. And there's a number of you basically inside of these logic apps, I put different connectors in it. And there's some great connectors for things like Yammer, for things like Office 365, whether it be mail or files inside of OneDrive for Business. And there's also other ways that I can call out to other APIs. So what I did is I put together my own custom connector that I'm going to actually try to work with the Power BI team to get blessed. But it is a connector that we get triggered on a message getting created, and we can then immediately go and push that through into a model and have it update in real time. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So to create a logic app, you're going to go into Azure for this. You can go get a trial of Azure. It doesn't have to be associated with your organizational account. I think you can get like a 60-day trial of Azure. But what I'm going to do is jump over to this new Azure portal where I can create these logic apps. I actually have a logic app that's running right now doing this, and we'll see if it how it runs. But we're gonna create a new one here from scratch. So the first step in here is I will create a new logic app. And it's under web and mobile. And I'll just create a logic app. Here I can give this a name. We'll call this Ignite Yammer Feed. And so that's going to go and provision this. Now, the other thing that I have in here are all these different connectors that I mentioned. And actually, I've already created those connectors. So I have a connector here for connecting into Yammer. I have a connector for SharePoint if I wanted to. And for each one of these connectors, they're bidirectional. So I can do things like listen for when messages get added to Yammer, but I can also post from a logic app into Yammer. So you could have something like maybe they have connectors for things like Salesforce, where maybe when I go and close a sale, I want to go post a message into Yammer automatically. You can do that 100% codeless inside of these solutions. So what I'll do is, first thing I need to do is set up a trigger. So you can see here I need to set up a trigger. And so what I'm going to do is just click on this, and it's going to bring kind of that designer surface for me to work with. Now, within here, I need to work with various different APIs. So you can see over on the right side of the screen, you haven't provisioned any APIs to work with. So this is where I'll find things like Yammer, like Office 365. So there's a big laundry list. In fact, Yammer's kind of front and center here when I come in. So I could go through and say that I want to connect into Yammer. So I'll go and do a create. We'll call this just the Yammer connector and say OK. There are other types of connectors that I might want to work with in here. And so what I'll do is, let me go into a completed one. I'm a little bit worried about time here. So this is one that I've already set up that is set up to connect into both Yammer and push it into my Power BI surface. So if I were to go look at the details here, it's actually really, really simple. There's not a whole lot to this. You can see here are the connectors over on the right that I have set up. So I have a SharePoint Online connector, I have a Yammer connector, and then I have this HTTP connector. And what I've done here is I'm saying anytime a new message is created, I'm doing it for a specific group. So you can see here I've specified the group, which is just, you can find that really easy on the URL. Anytime I'm doing that, I'm going to pass it off to this HTTP service. Now, what I'm going to do is work with the Power BI team to make this really, really simple, where I just hand off a message and it automatically would go in here. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm just specifying that what I want to send into this HTTP service is the body that came back when I went and got that message, when that message was created. And actually, we can actually see all the data go through this as it runs. So what I'll do is, let's find a group we can pick on. and we'll see this actually run. So I'm actually going to switch to my Microsoft network. And the main reason for this is I haven't deployed this to be global yet. So I'm going to do this quickly and probably in a safe place. Let's see, I want Microsoft. And I'm going to go to Richard's test group, where you will see I was testing this deep into the morning. All right, and what I'm going to do is just grab this ID up here, this 3715206, and I'm going to paste that into my Logic app. So I'll come in here to this Logic app, and all I have to do is say Edit, paste my group ID in here, say OK, say Save. And this is done. And actually, even though this looks a little bit cryptic, this is actually quite simple too. I'm just saying, hey, go send the data here, and this is what I'm sending, is the body that came out of that trigger. And so they make a really nice little dashboard here in these Logic apps. No code is involved here. It's all just configuring these little connectors. And I can see all the activity that has gone through this. Now, you can see where I finally got it to work about 11 p.m. last night. Nothing like getting it to the wire. But let's go and do a post now that we have this in here. So what I'll do is I'll just say, hello from Ignite on a Friday morning. So I'm going to post that in here. The cool thing is this will pick up. It runs on a 1 minute duration. So every minute. You can actually get it down to every second. I just didn't want to have to pay for that. It's more expensive the more frequent you go and run against it. But every minute it's going to go, and it looks like it's in the process of running one right now. And we hope we get a little green star. If I click on this, we should be able to see what came in. So it's in the process of loading. The other thing I could do here in the meantime too is go to Power BI, and we can see if our data set showed up. So there's our data set, Ignite Yammer demo. And if I look at, I didn't put a lot in this data set, but if I look at sender and message count, we can see it's one message, it's by me, and that was automatically stuck in there through with zero code using these Logic apps. So it's a cool way I can keep, instead of having to do exports maybe nightly, I could actually keep this more real time if I wanted to see things more immediately as things are happening. And there's a lot of really good debugging that occurs in these, so I'm not sure why this is, it's not loading for me. Let me actually view the trigger. This actually shows you every time the trigger fires. You can see most of them are just skipped because there wasn't anything to pick up. But here's that one succeed that happened about 3 minutes ago when I did it. I could go look at the actual message that came through and the output that we sent. So this is all the details here of the actual message. You can see hello from Ignite on a Friday morning, the time, all the details are there. We can send that on, put it anywhere we want. So that's really what I wanted to cover today. I wanted to cover a little bit on kind of the journey of the network administration type of reporting and analytics, but also key on some things that I think end users can do. There's nothing that could prevent, I hope that might be a scary statement, there's nothing that would prevent someone, just a normal user on your network, from being able to use something like this, right? That's why I put it in the end user tools. If you have like a business analyst that wants to be able to get some data, there's nothing malicious here. We're just reading data out, and we're just listening for data and being able to pull it and put it somewhere. So I think this is really cool because it is codeless. I think a BA could very easily leverage something like this to analyze one of the groups they're in. Nope, you could do any group as long as it's not a group that's like private.
So a private group, anything they have access to.
Anything they have access to. That's right.
So verify like a global Office 365 admin,
Could probably get to anything. Yep,
even if they're not a Yammer researcher.
I think so. So with that, I've come to the end of my time. I have about a minute up here. If you guys have questions, I have a bunch of T-shirts that I never found a way to figure out. So if you just want a T-shirt, you can come up here and get it. Otherwise, feel free to come answer some questions. I will tell you I have a session back-to-back, so I'm probably not going to be able to hang out here that long. But I will answer your question, and if I can't get to everyone that has questions, we'll find some other mechanism like the Office 365 network. Would love to see your questions out there.